As I prepped for my daughter's surprise graduation party, memories of our family's journey flooded my mind. Raising 3 kids alone after the divorce hadn't been easy, but those struggles had bonded us in ways I never expected, making milestones like today all the more meaningful. I hummed a tune, lost in the chaos of party preparations, when the doorbell rang. In that moment, I almost asked my son Anthony to distract whoever was at the door so I could finish up, but when I opened it, I found myself face to face with an uninvited guest. "Hey," he greeted with a casual wave, looking disheveled, like someone who had been living rough. I froze, caught off guard, unable to find the words. "Dad?" The voice cut through my shock, and I turned to see my kids standing behind me, their faces filled with disbelief. My daughter, Karen, immediately rejected Anthony's attempt to greet the man, insisting he wasn't part of our lives anymore. She ushered Anthony back inside, clearly determined to shut the door on the past. Mark, standing there awkwardly, tried to assert himself, claiming he was here to take care of us again. His words felt so out of place, so absurd, that we couldn't help but laugh, but his confusion quickly turned to anger, and he ranted about not being mocked, growing more frustrated by the second. "What's going on out here?" Another voice joined the scene, curious about the commotion. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the confrontation. "Let me show you what our lives look like now," I said, stepping forward. "I'm Andrea, 35 years old, a stay-at-home mom who also works remotely. Life hasn't gone as I envisioned, but I've built a fulfilling career in engineering advertising, cultivated meaningful relationships, and found happiness in unexpected places. Our mornings are a whirlwind." Anthony, my middle schooler, always asks why I didn't wake him up sooner, while Karen, my high school daughter, does well in school but is shy when it comes to anything romantic. Mark, my husband, who once mentored me at work, is now often absorbed in his phone, leaving me to manage the hectic rhythm of our home. Amid all the ordinary moments and unexpected twists, we find strength in each other and joy in the journey, however unpredictable it may be. When I first met him, Mark seemed earnest, but his lack of attention to detail and failure to come through when it mattered were always evident. Back then, I never thought of him romantically, but his persistence wore me down, and eventually, I found myself at the altar, my first true acknowledgement that I could be persuaded. Recently, Mark's promotion to manager has meant more business trips, and while I'm proud of his success, his vague answers about his return dates and his irritation when I try to offer him comfort have been disheartening. At home, he's glued to his phone, often barely present, and his unpredictable arrivals have become the norm, with him expecting meals to be ready whenever he shows up. I've avoided confronting him about his late nights, unsure of how to address it. Today, as with so many times before, he was vague about his trip, and when I gently asked when he'd be back, his response was explosive. It froze the air between us. I stood there, holding a plate, stunned, apologizing for even asking. He didn't respond, simply walked out, his anger hanging heavy in the room as the door slammed behind him. My attempt to bring up our finances was abruptly cut short, leaving a heavy silence hanging in the air. Karen, sensing the tension, glanced at me, while Anthony's tight grip on his mug betrayed his unease. I tried to defuse the situation, apologizing for adding to Mark's stress, but Karen, ever supportive, quickly reassured me that none of this was my fault. Her hug provided a small, fleeting comfort amidst the storm of emotion swirling inside me. Realizing it was time for the kids to leave, I urged them to get going. Anthony quickly hurried out, muttering something under his breath as he disappeared down the path, kicking up dust in his wake. Karen shot me one last, worried look, meeting my strained, forced smile, the one that could never quite hide the underlying tension. As the door closed behind them, the silence settled over the house like a thick fog, oppressive and cold. The house, now free from the usual morning chaos, felt hollow, its emptiness echoing the sting of Mark's angry exit. The weight of his harsh words lingered, a painful reminder of the widening gap between us. In these moments, I've learned to shove aside the negative emotions and push forward, even if it means talking myself into staying motivated. With Mark no longer contributing financially, the responsibility falls on me to ensure our children have everything they need. I've taken on a career as a graphic designer, knowing the income is unpredictable, but determined to make it work. Every day I remind myself to stay strong, even as I fold laundry, marveling at the single cloud in the sky, humming songs from my youth to keep my spirits lifted. Mark's business trips have become routine, and his late-night returns are now so rare they're almost mythical. When I've tried to gently inquire about his late hours, his responses are dismissive, shutting down any further conversation. His communication has dwindled to brief, cold exchanges, so different from the partner I once knew. When he walks away, leaving nothing but a chill in his wake, I'm momentarily stunned, but I quickly pull myself together. My focus now shifts to securing our financial future. I can't rely on Mark for anything anymore. I've carefully organized our finances into 4 accounts, one for my income and daily expenses, another for the mortgage, and a third set aside for emergencies. While the first account is stable for now, the thought of the looming mortgage payments fills me with dread. I push the anxiety aside, choosing instead to focus on the tasks at hand. But when I check the emergency account, I find an unexpected withdrawal, one that sends a wave of unease through me. My heart races. This is something my kids don't know about. Could this be fraud? But the withdrawal pattern doesn't match the usual signs of a scam, making the situation even more unsettling. A creeping suspicion starts to form, one I can't quite shake off. As I wrestle with this new financial mystery, I also feel the toll these stresses are taking on me, my failing eyesight, the fine lines that mark the passage of time, the remnants of sleepless nights spent working at my desk. Still, I refuse to be harsh on myself. I face the situation head-on, determined to resolve the financial anomaly, and prepare for whatever challenges come next. Whether or not Mark is part of that future, my resolve to protect and provide for my family is unshaken. The idea of Mark returning home while the sun is still up feels like a distant dream, as impossible as the chance of a sudden hailstorm tomorrow. As I stand by the grill, watching the chicken sizzle, I brace myself for the inevitable critique he'll offer at dinner, his discontent with the meal, which will probably lack some imagined excitement. Cooking used to offer me a brief escape from the daily grind, but now, it's overshadowed by a sense of impending dread. I've been stewing over how to confront Mark about the mysterious withdrawal from our emergency fund. With the kids usually locked away in their rooms until dinner, I thought tonight might be the right moment to bring it up, but finding the right words feels daunting. Just as I'm about to gather the courage, Mark excuses himself to the bathroom, leaving me torn between relief at avoiding the confrontation and frustration at missing the opportunity. Then, I notice his phone left behind on the table, buzzing with a notification from a name I don't recognize. The temptation to peek is overwhelming, especially knowing he'll be gone for a while. My heart races as I edge closer to the table, glancing at the screen. Just as I get a fleeting look, I hear footsteps approaching. I hurriedly return the phone to its place as Anthony walks into the room, asking about dinner. I assure him it'll be ready soon, my mind racing as I consider the possibility that tonight's dinner complaints might go beyond the food. When the house quiets and everyone falls asleep, I can't shake the urge to investigate further. Driven by a mix of duty and curiosity, I quietly slip out of my room, determined to uncover the truth. Mark's deep, steady snoring tells me he's out cold, likely helped by the beer I encouraged him to drink with dinner. The hallway is dimly lit as I make my way to his room, the air thick with the lingering smell of alcohol. I push past the discomfort, refusing to let the stench stop me. I reach his bedside, determined to get the answers I need. I stared at Mark's phone, its cable a silent tether to the outlet, a lifeline that I knew I had to sever to find the answers I needed. Unplugging it would light up the screen, possibly revealing more than I was prepared to confront. But the need to know, to understand the betrayal that had been gnawing at me, urged my trembling hands into action. With my heart heavy and my hands unsteady, I carefully unplugged the phone, pressing it against my chest to keep the screen dark. I tiptoed back to my room. The soft sobs I hadn't realized were building spilling over, and I wiped them away hastily with the sleeve of my pajamas. Once inside my sanctuary, I turned on the phone, my chest tight as I unlocked it and searched for the messages that had been haunting me. The conversation with Bruce was worse than I could have imagined. There were plans for future trips, casual mentions of using my savings, betrayals that sliced through me with a pain I hadn't anticipated. As I read through their exchange, a chilling calm settled over me, a quiet realization that the betrayals went far deeper than I had ever guessed. Photographs, secret plans, stolen moments. My earlier worries seemed almost naive now. I returned the phone to its charger beside Mark, moving silently, deliberately, trying not to disturb the sleep that masked the truth of the man beside me. The next morning, I moved through the motions of preparing breakfast with an eerie smoothness, my movements mechanical. Mark appeared, looking disheveled, oblivious to the storm that was brewing in my heart. His casual greeting met my cold, steely response, far from the warmth of the morning sun. When he asked about breakfast, I didn't answer with food but with the harsh reality of his actions and the existence of Bruce. The moment he realized I knew, disbelief flashed in his eyes, quickly replaced by anger. It escalated so quickly that, before I could catch my breath, he threw a plate across the room. It shattered behind me, the sound of final punctuation to the death of any civility between us. My children, caught in the chaos, watched in stunned silence. Karen, ever the quick thinker, recorded the confrontation, her presence a reminder that she was ready to protect me. Anthony, his hand gripping a baseball bat, stood alert but silent, embodying the tension in the air. I tried to calm them, urging caution, knowing their safety was my primary concern. The rest of the day was a blur of overwhelming emotions, and the weight of it all led to a professional setback. I had to ask for an extension for the first time in my career. When Mark returned later that day, his actions were shockingly cold. He placed divorce papers on the table without a hint of warmth, his words final, stripping away the last remnants of affection. Yet, in the midst of this storm, the unwavering support of my children gave me some semblance of peace. Their readiness to stand by me and protect me in that moment was a small but vital comfort in the face of such profound betrayal. Deciding to divorce felt like stepping into uncharted waters. I was overwhelmed, unsure if I could handle the financial burden alone. But when I shared my fears with Karen and Anthony, we found strength in each other's resolve. Karen offered to contribute her earnings from her part-time job, and Anthony volunteered to take on more household responsibilities. Accepting their help was difficult, but it was our way forward, together. 2 weeks after that heart-to-heart conversation, Mark's absence in our home brought a surprising sense of relief. My worries didn't vanish, but the atmosphere lightened. The weight of his presence had been suffocating, and with him gone, it felt like we could breathe again. With legal advice, we finalized the divorce. It was hard, but stepping into a new chapter with my children felt strangely hopeful, despite the challenges ahead. 2 years later, the journey had been far from easy. Karen balanced her studies with work, a sacrifice that, despite my protests, kept us afloat. When her exam results didn't meet our expectations, guilt weighed heavily on me, but Karen, with a maturity beyond her years, stood firm and owned her decisions. Anthony, too, became a steadying presence, managing the household chores and lightening my load, even if it meant the occasional squabble over laundry. Reflecting on these 2 years, it was clear that life after divorce had tested us in ways we hadn't anticipated. Yet, despite the hardships, we had weathered the storm together. And now, as I prepared a special dinner to celebrate Karen's acceptance into medical school, my heart swelled with pride and gratitude. This dinner wasn't just a celebration of her academic achievement, it was a tribute to the strength, resilience, and unwavering support we'd given each other through it all. Together, we had built something stronger from the ashes of our past. As I was finishing up preparations for our small party, the last thing I expected was Mark's sudden appearance at the door. His disheveled look and mismatched clothes took me by surprise, and I could feel the tension in the air as my children reacted. Their mix of rejection and shock was palpable, a clear sign of how far removed he had become from our lives. Mark, trying to reinsert himself into the fold, was met with disbelief and even laughter from us. His attempts to act as though nothing had changed felt absurd. His presence, jarring and unwelcome, served as a stark reminder of the path we'd been forced to walk since our separation. But as I looked at my children, standing by me with unwavering support, I realized that the true strength of our family didn't lie in the absence of struggles, it was in how we faced them together, united. Gathering my composure, I stood up and introduced Mark to Frank, my husband. I hadn't spoken much about Mark to Frank, so the introduction was awkward, filled with tension as everyone silently gauged the situation. Frank, ever polite, offered a cordial smile, but the familiarity in his voice revealed his role as the president of the company where Mark was employed. Mark, however, feigned ignorance, and the moment became increasingly uncomfortable. Frank, with pointed remarks, subtly highlighted Mark's recent professional failures, which Mark denied with defensive accusations of infidelity. I calmly corrected him. Our divorce was final, and his claims were baseless. But the real revelation came when I confronted him with the proof of his financial betrayal. I showed him the unauthorized withdrawal from our emergency fund, money that had been meant for my children's future, not for his reckless spending. It was a significant sum, $50,000 of my late parents' inheritance, and Mark's actions bordered on criminal, with potential charges of forgery looming. Cornered, Mark had no choice but to agree to a settlement. He would return the stolen funds and commit to alimony payments. Later, as Frank and I sat down with coffee, I found myself reflecting on what had just transpired. The alimony payments weighed heavily on my mind, not only because of the financial burden they represented but also because of the impact on Mark. His misconduct had cost him everything: his job, his financial stability, and his sense of pride. Now, struggling to make ends meet with multiple low-paying jobs, his life seemed to be in freefall. Frank's decision to sever professional ties with Mark's former employer seemed extreme at first, but Frank was firm in his belief that integrity, both in business and personal matters, must come first. It was a stance that made me realize just how far removed from those values Mark had become. Despite the sense of vindication, I couldn't shake the feeling that life had a way of turning the tables in harsh and unexpected ways. As we discussed Mark's downfall, I couldn't help but feel a strange mix of emotions. Mark's life had crumbled, his downfall punctuated by the loss of a major client and his job, leaving him struggling under the weight of the debts he'd accumulated. He'd been left to pick up the pieces of a failed relationship with Bruce, who had run up debts that Mark, as the guarantor, was now responsible for. Even as I listened to his sarcastic remarks about our children, Karen's success in medical school, and Anthony's newfound passion for law, I felt a pang of sympathy for him. He wasn't the man I once knew, but he was still the father of my children, and I couldn't fully dismiss that bond. When Mark casually offered to pay his share of the bill, I didn't hesitate. I handled it swiftly, not allowing any room for debate. Our brief encounter ended with polite words and a quiet departure. As Frank and I left, I couldn't help but think about the upcoming doctor's appointment and the news I was eager to share with my children. Frank and I were expecting. The reaction from Karen and Anthony was a blend of shock, concern, and eventual support. They, too, had grown over the years, and their readiness to accept the new chapter in our lives filled me with warmth. Frank suggested I take a break from freelancing during the pregnancy, but I was determined to keep working. A compromise was reached, and we moved forward, as always, with a shared sense of understanding. On my way to the doctor, I passed a joyful family enjoying the sunshine, and I paused for a moment to reflect on my own happiness. After everything we had been through, a quiet sense of contentment washed over me. The road had been long and filled with unexpected turns, but it was these moments of love, resilience, and new beginnings that made everything worthwhile. Together, we had weathered the storms, and now, with Frank and our growing family, I was filled with hope for the future.